Hello everyone. Today I'd like to start by posing a few questions for you. The first one, we are going to look at this banjo here, and I'm going to ask you the question, why is it that when I pluck a certain string, I can get another string to vibrate without touching it? So pay close attention to this string right here and see what happens when I pluck this string. You'll see that this string starts to vibrate, even though I only plucked this string. Another question for you is, how come the Tacoma Narrows Bridge violently collapsed one day in 1940? And the final question is, how come when we're trying to push someone on a swing, we're only able to push them at certain intervals of time to make them go the highest that they can possibly go? Well, before we look at this idea in physics of resonance, we have to learn another idea in physics, and that is this idea of amplitude. So amplitude is going to be defined as the distance away from equilibrium, the distance away from an equilibrium position that an object moving in simple harmonic motion will experience. Okay, well, what is meant by equilibrium? Well, equilibrium is simply the resting position of whatever it is that is moving in simple harmonic motion. I think here it's best to look at an example of a swing, or in our case, the physics case, a pendulum. The equilibrium position is when the pendulum hangs straight down. It's where it wants to be most of the time. If we take our pendulum and we pull it, in this case we're displacing it by an angle of theta, we're going to give it some sort of amplitude or distance away from its happy equilibrium position. Okay? So, now that we know what amplitude is, we can look at this idea of resonance. Now, resonance is a repeated small disturbance resulting in increasing amplitudes of our system. And we'll come back to that in a second. Another thing to know is that everything has a certain resonant frequency that it likes to vibrate at. So we're going to look at three examples. We're going to look at a swing, we're going to look at the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, and we're also going to look at the strings of a banjo to see how we can connect these three ideas using this one idea of resonance. So let's start with the swing. Every swing, or in this case, every pendulum, has a frequency that it likes to swing at. If we just give this a little encouragement, we can observe its resonant frequency. Now, if I were to come along, and if I were to match this swing's resonant frequency, I can give it small disturbances. I can begin to increase this little astronaut's amplitude. Okay, so I'm going to match the resonant frequency of the swing. And by doing that, I'm increasing the amplitude more and more each time. Now, what happens if I didn't match that resonant frequency quite right? Well, I would decrease the amplitude, and the astronaut wouldn't go anywhere at all. So it's all about matching that resonant frequency. Now if we look at the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, how can we describe that engineering disaster using this idea of resonance? Well, we said that resonance is a repeated small disturbance resulting in increasing amplitudes. Now, Tacoma Narrows was a particularly windy area, and when this wind created repeating small disturbances, it resulted in an increasing amplitude in the bridge. And if you increase something's amplitude enough, a structure's amplitude enough, it'll eventually tear itself apart. And that's what happened with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. A small disturbance of wind resulted in an increasing amplitude that tore the bridge apart. And of course, the final thing that we want to look at is a banjo string. Sometimes it takes one thing to make something else resonate at a frequency. In the swing case, it takes someone pushing you on a swing to increase your amplitude. In the Tacoma Narrows Bridge example, it took some wind, a small disturbance in wind, resulting in an increased amplitude in the bridge. If we're looking at a banjo string, well, the small disturbance created by the string that I plucked transferred through the head of the banjo and caused the other string to vibrate. Well, you may be asking yourself, how come all of the strings didn't vibrate? Well, that is because in a careful combination of string thickness and tension, the banjo strings only want to vibrate at certain frequencies. The banjo strings only want to vibrate at certain frequencies. So that high D string that I plucked resonated with the lower D string that I plucked because they were tuned to the same note or the same harmonic frequency. So just to recap, we learned about amplitude. And now amplitude is the distance away from an equilibrium or resting position. In the case of a swing or a pendulum, the equilibrium position is where it's resting or hanging straight down. The equilibrium position is where it wants to be. And if we offset it, in this case by an angle theta, it could be distance as well, we are adding amplitude into the system. And then we learned about resonance and how resonance is caused by a repeated small disturbance resulting in an increasing amplitude. And we also learned that everything, nearly everything, has a resonant frequency, including swings, the Tacoma Narrow Bridge that tore itself apart, and of course, banjo strings. So these three different things are all tied together by one physics idea of resonance. And tomorrow we'll explore even more ideas that use resonance to describe their motion.